Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly live stream. Today, I'm very happy to lead a great showdown between ABAC and ReBAC, or attribute and relationships, or allow and deny, or whatever you choose after. With me, Alex and David, the two folks that I know that recognize with ABAC and ReBAC the most. I'll not telling you now who is who, but they will tell you very fast. So I'll be happy for you to introduce yourself. I'll start with Alex just because it starts with A. No preferences to nothing.
Thanks, Gabriel. I'm Alex Babeanu. I'm the CTO at 3Edges, and I'm the ReBAC guy.
Oh, you tell it too early.
Oh, did I? Oh, darn.
Yeah, I know
Maybe
Alex
he's lying.
is 20 years old veteran of the identity space and has a lot to say. And today is going to tell us a lot of good things about ReBAC, but also about ABAC. We'll wait to that soon. David, do you want to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, my name is David. I'm the CTO at Axiomatics. We do, like everyone on this call, we do authorization. And I've been working in the authorization space for the past 15 years. And I won't say which of ReBAC or ABAC or PBAC or RBAC I am. That's a secret.
Yeah. So David, also known as one of the inventor of the Alfa language or standard Alfa language, and he's known as the guy that they're not getting old since the first day of Alpha. That's the way I saw him describe himself. So again, good to have you here, and I'm super happy to start this showdown. And I'll hope we'll not have one winner, but two at the end of this showdown. But before we are going to attribute-based access control and relationship-based access control, we know that they are all hyped for the last 3 to 5 years, because a new term is not really new in computer science, but a new in the market, fine-grained authorization. So what make fine-grained authorization a fine-grained authorization? And now I'll start with David.
So I think you can have to go back to the history of access control. So way back when, in the 70s, you had the notion of MAC and DAC, of course. We can talk about that later. And then we came up with access control lists, right? Your name would be on a list, and the fact that your name was on that list, you could do whatever it is you wanted to do. So get access to a file. That is actually as fine-grained as it gets, because it's specific to a user, specific to an item. But that actually, from a management standpoint, didn't really scale. So then we invented ReBAC, came out in 1992 officially, and ReBAC is coarse-grained, right? You to make things more manageable, you lost in granularity. So now you said, oh, if you have a role, if you have a group, then you can do these functions. And because of the nature of ReBAC, it was all very identity-centric. So what you said is, a user with a role manager can do or can get this entitlement, I'm sorry. And then it was up to the app or the target system to do anything more fine-grained, if at all. And it was all very opaque because it's within the app, you don't quite see it. Now, the reason why we're seeing fine-grained authorization, FGA, or fine-grained entitlements come up is that we're realizing that we don't want to have to reinvent the authorization wheel all the time. Rather, we want to be able to express it in a central tool somehow, and be fine-grained to the point of being able to determine user attributes and action attributes and resource attributes, and be able to compare those attributes and determine whether access should be granted or denied. And that's why we're saying fine-grained. It's not just about the role, it's not just about who you are, but it's also what it is you want to do and the context of the interaction and the target system that you're interacting with.
So adding, if I'm trying to summary, adding the attributes of the other stakeholder of a policy decision make it fine-grained, because we can get decision that based not only on user segmentation.
Yeah, you're looking at more dimensions. It's no longer just identity, it's also context, resource, action, many different dimensions. And I use the word attributes because in my mind, of course, I have a biased model, but I guess Alex might have a different word instead of attribute that you could use.
Oh, yeah. So Alex, what is fine-grained authorization?
Yeah, I have a slightly different view. Well, I mean, it's kind of the same, but slightly different. There's two things that can be fine-grained. Typically, the resource you're protecting. So how granular is it? Is it like a big coarse thing, or is it down to a data element? And there's also the subject of the thing. How fine-grained is your subject? Is it a specific identity, or is it like a group? So fine-grained access control is using a granular subject and a granular resource and combining them to create authorization rules. That's
So
my view. So,
I hear like you're both stating two sides instead of one side. So instead of focusing in identity or the subject, if we're looking for machine-to-machine authorization, we are also looking at the other side, at the side of what we are trying to read or what we are trying to access. But when David spoke, I also heard about a 3D, about the action. So if you're using attributes, that could make a better granular decision. I know that graph also has a ways to actually deal with that fine grain. So at the end, I guess the most important point is when we make the decision, we can get a granularity of a single instance, a single entity at the system, instead of going with segmentations.
yeah,
Correct.
That's very good.
Yeah,
and it's not just, we mentioned subject, resource, action. You could also include context, right? Time of day, risk scores, events. You could tie back to things like CAPE. I guess we could talk about CAPE later, but it's not just these 3 dimensions. It's just anytime you're capable of figuring out a bit of information, whatever that information may be, then you should be able to use it in your authorization decision mechanism, either a policy or a graph or something else.
So for every dimension, the decision should calculate even a single decision or entity in the dimension that we decide, right?
Yep, correct.
Which is make it fine. That's great. So now we all know that fine-grained authorization, and this is why we're here today, has 2 main approaches. One is having conditions on top of the attributes of these 4 dimensions, and the other is having all these dimensions entities in a graph, and then we can very easy, for example, search for a very specific one or set of attributes. And we know that David, since his early days in Alpha, is a big supporter of attribute access control. But now I want you to challenge you to explain what is policy as graph, and at least one good thing to tell about it.
I'll try, and Alex, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the single greatest benefit of graph-based authorization, as opposed to any other model, is that with graph, you don't start from 0. You actually start from a set of tooling that support graph. So GraphQL and Neo4j and all of the graph community. You're not starting from 0, right? In ABAC land, you literally have to build your policy engine. You literally have to build your policy syntax, by the way, right? Take Rego and Alfa and Zackwell. They did not exist. You had to create them. Whereas in graph, you already had the tooling. So if I had to name one huge benefit, is that you already had that platform to begin with. So it's kind of like, the policy people, they had to start from here and build up to do authorization. The graph people, they probably started from, a little higher up and build up to here.
Oh,
but
so
there's other benefits. Huh?
Yeah, so we basically did, anyway, go for it.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say is
other benefit.
Yeah. I mean, like the one that there's a couple things that Alex kind of likes to remind me of is in authorization land, there's really 2 questions you want to ask. One is the direct question: can I do this? Yes or no? And the open-ended question that some folks call search. We call it search within AuthZen. We can talk about AuthZen later. We call it reverse query axiomatics, partial evaluation, and open policy agents. So different terms. But the whole idea of search is to ask the reverse question, the open-ended question. Hey, what can happen? Or tell me how Alice can get access to medical record 1. And that is natively supported in graph as well, because all you're looking, as Alex would say, is you're trying to figure out the traversal from one node to another node. So that's also a huge plus. There is one more thing, one big difference. I won't say if it's a plus or a minus. It's just that graph is very visual. So when you look at your graph, if you look at Alex's presentations he did at EIC and Identiverse, he'll say, well, here's a Rego policy. Do you know what it does? Here's a graph. Do you know what it does? Well, clearly the graph is easier to understand. Personally, I think it's a matter of taste. Yes, a picture is worth 1,000 words and maybe 1,000 policies. I'm used to Alpha, so I can read Alpha very quickly. But yeah, maybe the learning curve is easier with graph for sure. So that's a difference that you want to consider between the 2. Can I bash graph?
Oh yeah,
no.
I think that I want to add, because sometimes I mean, our live stream are more like a kind of generic guys, technical or various or versatile technical backgrounds. I'll add that graphs in general, doing policy as graph, mean that we have a graph with all the relationship between our entities in the system, and by using conditions, we can check connections only to one entity, which can be with kind of a simple condition like ownership, and then we can drive permissions to all the relationships to them, right? So this is policies graph. This method allows us to do fine-grained authorization. And as David said, you have a very clear picture. This is why many times when you talk about the graph, you say that the main benefit of graph is the correctness. At any point of time, the state that you have of the graph, that's the correct permissions that you have. That again can be a plus, can be a minus. But again, it's a very it's an attribute of policies graph.
You should get my T-shirt, Gabriel. That's great.
Oh yeah, I definitely should get it.
I'm actually wearing your socks, Alex, today.
Oh, nice.
I thought,
very cool.
given I'm going to talk about graph, I should wear your
Should
socks.
showcase.
I'm not going to show my feet. No, I'm not that flexible.
Yeah.
Another, if I may add another great benefit to what you're adding, all you guys said is analytics. Because you have everything in a graph, the graph is a great source of data for doing identity analytics. So you can use the same exact data for doing analytics, including all the analytics algorithms that exist out there, clustering, neighbor, recommendations, etc. So.
Yeah, I think that's also something that's very beneficial in graph, especially with the benefit of reverse indices and reverse traversing, that you can have a very good and correct path of why a user get a permission or something like that. But Alex, we want you here today to explain us what is attribute-based access control. And David gave us 3 benefits or 3 good things about graph. I am expecting you to have at least 1, but that would be good to have 3 too.
Fair enough. So attribute, I mean, first of all, if we're talking attribute-based access control, you can do it with graphs as well. What we're talking about, what I like to talk about is policy as code, really, rather than attribute-based access control. There's a difference, right? Attribute-based access control is using attributes, and you can plot attributes in a graph as well. The graph is policy as data, so you use the data itself, the data model, as your policy. It's actually the engine can just run always the same algorithm. All that changes is the data model. But for policy as code, you have code. So a benefit there would be that it's probably much less disruptive for a developer or somebody who's used to coding to just adopt a policy as code engine and just start writing right away. I guess the learning curve might be easier that way for a developer. Another benefit is that David here was quite involved in XACML standard, which has been around for over 20 years now. So there is that old foundation to this policy as code in this standard that's been around for a long time. So that may be attractive to some, or may provide some kind of a safety net, or make everybody feel kind of cozy about it. So those 2 things are quite positive, I think.
So you said that attribute-based access control, or in general policy rule, are much more matured than having graphs for the drive of permission.
I mean,
that's a good point.
We've used graphs for, I mean, my first usage was probably 2015, so almost 10 years as well, but still younger than the XACML or
absolutely. Especially for like IT use cases and workforce identity, where authorization and policy engine are much older than in the application development space.
That's right.
That's good.
I'll add a third benefit, if I may.
Oh, wow. I'll let you do that because Alex also took the time to be in.
just to clarify, just to help Alex, ABAC is more of a model. ABAC doesn't mean that you're using policy or graph or whatever. ABAC is just the whole idea that you're not just going to be, people define the word ABAC way before NIST formalized it, but it was formalized by NIST in 2013, I think. There's a special publication, 800-163, I think. It's a really, really good read. And by the way, the special publication drove to 2 things. 1, the acknowledgement and the recognition of XACML and policy-based systems, but also the recognition and the creation of something called NGAC, which is way more graph-like, and Alex can talk about NGAC later. But ABAC is a model, right? It's the acknowledgement that, oh, hang on a minute, we're not just going to look at the role or the group, which is ReBAC, or role-based access control. We're going to look at all those dimensions that we talked about earlier, right? The identity, the resource, the context, the relationships, the actions, right? Now, with regards to policy-driven authorization or policy as code, if you want to say that, policy as code is a newer term. It aligns with everything as code. Everything. Ever since the explosion of DevOps and DevSecOps, it's everything as code. So, but before DevOps, we already had policy as code, if you will, because you could write a XACML policy, or you could write a ReGO policy, or you could write an Alfa policy by hand if you wanted to. But where I was going with the third benefit is, in my mind, there's a stronger correlation between the original plain old English requirement, be it a business requirement, be it a legal requirement, and the actual output. Because if you say, for instance, I'm developing an app, a ride-sharing app, okay, and in the ride-sharing app, I'm saying, oh, riders should only be able to see their rides, not any other people's rides, right? Drivers should only be able to see the position of the rider if they're within 5 minutes of pickup, or stuff like that. This is plain old English, right? And implementing that, you could implement that in graph or in policy-driven authorization, of course, but it makes more sense, or there's a closer correlation. Wait for it, Alex. There's a closer correlation between the plain old English requirement and the actual policy, because the policy mirrors the language directly. That's all.
So this is why I guess we agree to disagree, because in my view, if you can whiteboard it, you can graph it, you can
True.
make a policy out of it. So that's the great benefit of typically you just need a whiteboard and you've done your policy. Actually,
I like the Showdown vibes there. I think that's very cool, because I also see now actually a question that came from the audience. Yatin asked, I hope I pronounced well the name, but Yatin asked a question that came again and again. I'll say that Permit is always trying to do the peace across all the stakeholders. So because we are focusing in application developers, we're trying to do not focus on the permission model, but having a good experience to model everything in the application. And this is why we are also the not develop policy engine. We are using OPA, we can use Alfa, we can use any kind of graph. But the question that Yatin asked is, while moving towards ABAC from ReBAC, one of the most complex scenarios faced is how to guide teams on where not to use ABAC. And I think that's a great topic to discuss about, because there is also like something really, not nice with fine-grained access control, because it creates some over complexity on some layers of authorization and permissions. So Yarin is asking for suggestion how to manage this as a platform. I really want to answer the permit answer, but since you are the guest, you'll start from this one.
I think, go ahead, Alex. We'll go alphabetical.
All right. So I think if you want to use ReBAC, in my sense, it's better used if the resource owner creates the roles and manages their own role. If you want to centralize roles, what we see in the wild is eventually you end up with role explosion. Like after a few years, there's so many roles, you can't really know who has access to what. And that's kind of a big problem with roles if you try to do centralized access control. I've seen this when I spent 10 years in consulting. I've seen this at every single engagement, public, private, higher education, every sector. So if you can have the resource owner manage their own resource, they can create their own roles and manage it. But if you want to centralize, it becomes a nightmare over time. David,
and even if you let I see the explosion in groups, right?
Yes,
so the same thing happened with resources, happened with groups. And I think that a good point to justify combine ReBAC and ABAC, ReBAC and ReBAC, or ReBAC, ReBAC, and ABAC together. But from my perspective, and I'll get to that after I'll hear David, I think there is also good sense to combine them both, to have ReBAC for course segmentation or the high level, and then ABAC and ReBAC to create another level of security. But I'll get to that soon, because again, you're my guest, you're first. So David.
Yeah, I think your point is really good, Gabriel, and I'm sure both Alex and I agree on that. When we say let's do ABAC, let's do ReBAC, let's do some policy, we're not saying throw away your roles. We need roles, we need groups, we need identity management, right? It's just that instead of having technical roles, of which you could have hundreds or thousands, and that leads to role explosion, try to go back to having business roles. So an example would be, imagine you're running a bank. And that bank has branches in every single state in the US. Okay, so that's 50 branches. Now, you might want to implement a business policy that says a teller can only see customer accounts in their branch. In ReBAC, you would end up with 50 different roles, one for each state, right? In ABAC or ReBAC, it doesn't really matter how you implement the fine-grained authorization. You would end up with a single role, which would be you're a teller, and then you happen to have a location, and maybe if you live in DC, maybe you serve Maryland and Virginia and DC, which by the way makes 51. And that's just a location on the user, and then you just define a location on the customer profile or the customer record, and suddenly with a single role you can serve all 50 states, right? That's better. Now, having a role teller underscore Virginia, people understand what that means, but you gotta realize that there's more than just the one system. There's hundreds of systems you're protecting, and what happens is little by little in ReBAC land, people will create new roles because there's a new use case that wasn't catered to with the old roles, and the roles, they tend to be written, they have to fit in, say, 10 characters. So you're trying to find a role string that will fit your thing, and then you end up with very opaque role descriptions. You don't really know what they do anymore, and you're so afraid of deleting that you never deprovision users or clean up your roles.
There's so many problems. Like over time, role owners disappear from companies. So like, who's the owner? What shall we do with this role? I've seen roles with 10,000 members. How does that help? I've seen it. So that's actually pretty slow even in computing, because you can find a role pretty fast in LDAP, but finding one member out of 10,000 in a multiple attribute list, not that fast.
I think you are trying to bring here a benefit of ReBAC, that because you are looking always on a graph, then you can very easily find specific user with a specific role, which is fine. And I think it does lead. So I have a suggestion how to manage this as a platform. I think at the end, when we are looking on together on ReBAC and ABAC together, ReBAC and ABAC, ReBAC and ReBAC, we deciding to do fine-grained authorization first as ABAC, and maybe whatever you are looking on it, at the end, we should have segmentation. Even if the segmentation is based on a condition, like attribute-based access control, or on a relationship, and then we have a group that's segmentized by relationship in a graph, at the end, you should manage it all from the product perspective as a user segmentation, as let's say as columns, and as a resource segmentation, let's say as roles. You can see a live demo at the Permit platform, that the way we segmentize. But the thing about segmentation is always having your developers, your IT architect, to think in a product thinking and not in a model thinking. And that's why, even like if you are doing ABAC, at the end, this ABAC is converted to segments, segments of resource, right? And this segment is correct. It is based on attributes, but it's still a segment. And then at the point where your developers or your IT architects or whatever it is need a new segmentation, they will try to think simple. They will not have a real reason to write a new policy rule if they can have a segmentation that is coarse-grained by a role. And if they need to add conditions on top of it, or add ABAC, or model it inside the policy graph, then it became easy. So my suggestion is, no matter if you're using ABAC or using ReBAC, always think a policy about segmentations of user and segmentation and resources and the rules that actually cross this segmentation. And I can say that I saw a lot of policy modeling and policy rules and Rego and Alfa and a lot of like languages. At the end, maybe 5 or 3% of the edge cases will be policies that do not fit to segmentation. But 95, 98% of policies, even fine-grained, fit with the idea of segmentation. And that's a good way to avoid people abusing fine-grained access control models.
So Gabriel, you're pointing to a really good point. So whatever the underlying technology, whether you use policy and whatever language you use, by the way, because there's a few languages you can choose, or whether you go down the path of a graph-based authorization, what really matters is kind of like the abstraction layer, the management layer of how you let people write their configuration, for sure. And segmentation is one great way of doing it, because you're going to help people group things into different categories. And of course, because IAM has been so I-centric, so identity-centric, we don't have a lot of stuff on the resource side, but we definitely do need to do the resource modeling and let people understand, oh, I'm dealing with a medical record. I'm dealing with, going back to my ride sharing example, I'm dealing with a ride, I'm dealing with a driver, and so on and so forth. Yeah, if you do that, it's going to make your creating your authorization much easier. Traditionally, in policy land, all you have is the policy. So there's a lot of stuff you want to build up for the management. I mean, I guess this is where Opal, the framework that you built, comes in. In Graphland, you get some of the stuff, more of the stuff out of the box, because you have to build that ontology, that schema on top of which you're going to express your graph. So like different technologies start at different levels, but at the end of the day, it's really the management that you want to build on top that's going to make your authorization successful.
I gotta say something about the segmentation comment, Gabriel, and probably your 95% is because your stat is because you're actually, that's what you do, so that's what you see, right? But what we see is that the policies that we look at are very relational. Take, for example, B2B2C use cases for CIM. These are very relational use cases, like you are related to this entity, but you still should have access to the thing. So it's really hard to segment those use cases, and that's where the power of graph comes in. You have to actually draw it out and to see how the relationships work out.
I think that's the nice thing about to decouple between modeling and configuration thinking and the way that the things actually work behind the scene. Because even, I mean, I really like when people asking me about graphs, so I always bring this idea of B2B2C. So for one great example is that you're sending an email, you're sharing a file, and all the email recipients, Gmail knows to tell you if they have permissions or not, right? The only way to achieve that without saving tons of data that is unstructured in attribute is having a graph, right? If we have a graph, we can take people from completely external organization and say they have or did not have access to things that are modeled inside your business. And I think that's great that behind the scene, we have an engine that allow us to do it. But at the end, for me as a user, when I'm sending this email, when I'm configuring permissions in Google Drive, I'm assigning roles, right? I'm assigning users into a segment of a viewer on my files.
And what I said, it's your own resource that you protect, so you can create your own roles, then it makes sense. But if you start centralizing, if Google started centralizing these into roles, it'd be a nightmare, right?
Absolutely. So the configuration part, I think that there is also another question that I see now from the audience, like SaaS and COTS software typically implement an ReBAC model. And the question is, what will it take for SaaS and COTS vendor to adopt policy or graph-based solution? I think personally that no SaaS should bring access to conditions or graph for the configuring users. The configuring users should have a very simple way to model and configure policies. Like in Gmail, at the end, you are assigning roles. Behind the scene, there is an engine that model it as a graph and give permissions, but at the end, you are assigning roles, you are segmentizing users. And I think that the best implementation for SaaS to implement fine-grained access control is in a way that the user will not feel the complexity of building conditions or relationships.
I agree and disagree, Gabriel.
Yeah, me too.
And I also want to switch a little bit hats. So the very first part of the answer is going to be very easy. The person in the audience asking, what will it take for SaaS and COTS and what we call brownfield applications to adopt fine-grained authorization? The answer is there is a working group under the OpenID Foundation that Alex and I are part of, and Gabriel, I think you're part of as well, right? It's called the AuthZen, AuthZen working group. We are working exclusively on the APIs for authorization. So we're not looking at how authorization is done. So if you're doing graph or policy or hybrid or something else, we don't care, right? We're just building the APIs. And the goal of AuthZen is really to have what we call the OAuth moment. The OAuth moment is that idea that 10, 15 years ago, whenever you bought a SaaS or a COTS, you accepted the vendor's way of doing authentication. And if the vendor said, import your users or create passwords in my tool, you would be like, okay, I'm going to create passwords in your tool. Well, now we're getting, since OAuth has said, no, you cannot do that. Oh, thanks for the link, Gabriel. You did not share it to the audience, though, I think, or did you?
Oh, to
Anyway,
Austin Palmes. Yeah, I'll show it to
yeah.
everyone.
Now what we're saying is, what the auth folks said, no, you cannot do authentication internally anymore. You have to go out to your identity providers, your social providers, your Google, your Okta, so on and so forth. We want to achieve the same thing with AuthZen. That being said, it's a taller order because doing identity management it's a one-sided equation. You're only dealing with identity data. It's very well structured. It's owned by a single team. Doing the same thing for authorization, well, it kind of depends on the SaaS, and it kind of depends on the complexity, the SaaS or the COTS of the environment. Maybe an Uber, I was talking about rate sharing, maybe an Uber doesn't have that fine grain of an authorization need, and maybe they can just roll their own. A Salesforce, however, or an SAP, right? Big systems with very rich data, with very rich and sorted. I was going to say classified, but I don't mean classified from a defense perspective. I mean organized, tagged, data. Then it makes sense to do fine-grained authorization because you're dealing with an opportunity, a contact, an account, a purchase order, all of which have a bunch of labels, all of which can be attributes into a graph or into a policy. And you're right, Gabriel, that if a SaaS like Salesforce is going to adopt fine-grained authorization, be it graph, be it policy, they're probably going to want to abstract away the complexity of the underlying tool to their customers. But some customers will also want the ability to write policy or write configuration. So you also want to be able to, for those 20% customers who want that additional complexity, give them that thing. The analogy would be in Excel or in Google Sheets, right? It's that Excel and Sheets are a very, very powerful tool. Yet anyone can use Excel because they've made it easy, right? The easy case is easy. You can do 2 + 2, you get 4. But if you want to do pivot tables, if you want to do scripting, you can also do all that. And I think authorization kind of has that same challenge, right? You want to do the easy stuff easy, going back to your management point, but you also want to open the door to the complex use cases. Sorry, that was very
But the
long-winded.
question is how much surface of configuration I want to let my user. You mentioned when we started our discussion, you mentioned mandatory access control and discretionary access control, which are both mandatory. Said, okay, all the control is by the developer, no permissions for no one. Discretionary means I'm letting my users have different permissions in the system. We have a lot of discussions lately that we are coming into an era when we need something which is more proactive because users being very sophisticated, one. Second, they are very aware about privacy, about ownership. Users asking for fine-grained permissions as a feature. And I believe as a product developer that this is a high priority to give a good experience. And maybe that's a good topic to open. What is the experience we want to give to our application users in terms of configuring permissions? Maybe we need to find a new way to configure, which is not roles, because for most of the users, especially the non-technical users, roles is the best abstract way to describe permissions. Maybe that's a good point to rethink that and having better user experience for configuring fine-grained permissions.
So this is actually one of our tenets at 3Edges anyway, is that we want to allow business users to also be able to do it, like non-technical people, like not only developers, but have business people, the people who actually come up with the rules, because developers don't come up with the rules, they implement the rules. Other people come up with the rules. We want those people to participate in a common platform. That would be, if they could collaborate, I mean, it doesn't have to be 3Edges, any platform that makes them collaborate, it would benefit the whole endeavor, right? They could speak the same language somehow, and then just cycle quickly over policies, test quickly, and come up with the right solution. So that's kind of a very good point there, for sure.
I agree, Alex, and some of the stuff that I've been working on for 10 years now is this whole idea of an authorization policy lifecycle where you get all the stakeholders together. You start as a product manager or an application owner in defining your application requirements, not specific to authorization. Then you walk through this lifecycle that'll take you down the path of the authorization requirements, identifying the attributes or the pieces of those requirements, implementing, in my case, policies, in your case, a graph, but with the same attributes, it doesn't really matter. And then walking your way over to testing, auditing, access review, deployment, so on and so forth, and involving, by the way, the developers, because the developers are the ones writing the glue, right? There might be additional work that we can do at AuthZen as the working group, because like I said, we're working on the APIs, right? And the APIs, they're pretty non-opinionated. It's all about sending a yes/no question, getting a yes or a no back. But we could also create a profile for Salesforce, create a profile for Workday, create a profile for something else, and then you can make those policies or those configurations reusable, right? If you decided to write a policy about people being able to get access to opportunities in their region or their area, then maybe you could publish that as a policy that anyone can use, or maybe Salesforce could publish that in a repository of policies. And if it was a graph, same thing, right? You could write a graph and then you can publish it in a graph repository and so on and so forth.
So one quick comment about that COTS adoption or SaaS adoption question, and I think Alan Foster put it nicely in one of the panels at EIC. They will adopt it when their customers want it. So at least we have the plumbing now with AuthZen for this to happen. And as people start adopting it and will want it, they will eventually adopt it.
Like I don't think it's enough though.
We'll see, I guess.
Because the incentive for I'm looking at some of the SaaS examples I have in mind, right? I'm not going to name names, but they're developers who are implementing it themselves.
Right.
So they're taking, maybe they're taking OPA, maybe they're taking something else, and they're embedding the capability, right? So which is still better than I guess homegrown code, but they're not exposing the capability to their customers yet. Maybe we'll see the shift, to Alan's point, when customers really say, I need to be compliant with XYZ. You have to be able to show me the policy or show me the graph. Then maybe we'll see it. But there's still a long way to go. There's still a lot of convincing, and more importantly, education, and education of the developer, not necessarily education of the customer.
I think, we're just starting that authorization journey. Like, we'll see.
I'll say from the other side of the business world, I had a meeting with a chief architect in a large HMO. I think it was 2 weeks ago. And we just discussed
we want names.
You'll not get a name. And you actually, I don't think you know him because it's not an American HMO. But it was like, it's a quite large HMO, I think like 500,000 users or something like that. And we just had discussions about a very specific permission use case that they consider permit for. And then I just brought to the table, hey, why wouldn't you have a feature for data ownership? So a user can decide that I'm giving only my blood test result for a nurse for 2 hours instead of like every HMO professional has access to everything. And he said, like, if we have such a feature, that could be a great business like differentiator and business opportunity for us. So maybe these business opportunities of data ownership, of data privacy can open landscapes in the fine-grained authorization field.
Oh, Gabriel, I fully agree, and I'm glad you brought it up. Oftentimes, we think...
Sorry, NIST has published some stuff about exactly that use case, actually.
Did you play the lobbyist, Alex?
Did you what?
Did you pay the lobbyist?
Not even.
All his marketing budget went to that. But yeah, Gabriel, oftentimes we think of authorization as a negative thing. Like, I have to do authorization. It's about protecting my assets, and if I don't, the penalties are such and such. It's always a punitive thing, if you will. But actually, what you said it's true. It's an enabler as well, an enabler of new use cases. There's 2 examples I like to give. Number one, it would be when you go to the doctors today. Normally there's a pretty good chance your doctor's medical records are digitized, and you can actually browse your own medical records online. If you know what the terms mean, great, but at least you have access to your medical data. Go back 10, 20 years, the records were in the doctor's office behind a wall, and you didn't have access to, or behind a door, you didn't have access to those records. So the information was locked for lack of a good mechanism to share. Then the other example I'll give, I went to an Apogee presentation that they did with one of their customers. This was public. That was maybe 10 years ago. That customer, a very large insurance company, they realized that they're doing like home and car insurance, that sort of stuff. They realized they were sitting on a whole lot of claim data, but of course that was proprietary data. They couldn't share it with the outside world. And then they were like, well, hang on a minute, we're going to clean the data, we're going to anonymize it, we're going to sit it behind APIs, and we're going to sell it to the competition. So they were able to monetize their data and create a new business just because they were cleaning the data, anonymizing it, and sharing it only in the right way they're supposed to be sharing it. And that was that's a huge business enabler.
So now,
I actually love this use case because I mean, it can be like equal for ABAC and ReBAC because you can use your graph modeling for that, or you can just implement attributes and permissions on top of what you have today. I'll say that from my perspective, what I see that one of the benefits in ABAC is the verification phase of ABAC. We have a customer at Permit that do not enforce policies at all with our policies. All what they do is they model all their complex in-code homebrewed permissions. They model it in Permit, and they are using us for audit and performance measuring and trend measuring. They're not enforcing at all, but they are just put a not falsely, like a transparent check statement at every time they are doing policies, and they use it to create an extra layer of auditing and understanding on top of their product that is still complex. And when I'm thinking now in ABAC is also could be enabler, because you can just put it on your API gateway. You don't need to model your data from the beginning. So I mean, the benefit that you said earlier, that if the graph is there, you have permissions there. If the graph is not there, you can at least have a good layer of conditions and attribute-based access control on top of it to create a better fine-grained authorization.
Yeah.
This is interesting because it brings up kind of an elephant in the room here. It reminded me of IGA governance, right? I think maybe the governance tools of tomorrow are the authorization platforms, because that's where your policies are. So they're far better suited for access certification than any other tool, because they already know who has access to what, or they should anyway.
And
I say that more. I'm just saying this.
Go ahead.
Just to add to what Alex said, there's actually two things. It's a great point, Gabriel and Alex. On the one hand, going to specifically to what you said, Gabriel, the fact that you're now doing your, let's call it your pet PDP, and whether you actually enforce a decision or you just trigger a call, it does. I mean, of course you want to enforce a decision, but in the case of your customer, they're still relying on their old code. But at least it's building that audit trail of who tried to get access to which resource and what decision has been produced, and that the audit logs of any PDP, any authorization platform, be it Graph or something else, it's a treasure trove of information. It can tell you what's happening. It can also tell you things like, oh my gosh, someone tried to access this thing 100 times in the past minute. I always said deny. Always saying deny. Okay, good. You prevented the stuff from happening, but actually you should go upstream and say, why has someone tried to access something 100 times in the past minute when they've never accessed it before? So you can do a lot of analysis on your logs. And that's something that our customers sort of do, but they should do it even more. Like you should mine your audit logs big time. And then going to Alex's point on governance, like if you look at the traditional governance tools that focus on identity only, they give you a false sense of security, because now you know that Alice has been given the role XYZ_123_foo, and she's had it for 2 years. So clearly it's okay that she still has it, right? You have that false sense of security, but the truth is, you don't really know what those roles represents. And too often I see managers, they get a list of roles from, say, a cell point or whatever, and they just click yes, okay. Like they don't know what it is, and they would rather
the select all checkbox.
Yeah, exactly. Because they don't want to break someone. If you go down the path of fine-grained authorization, expressed using a policy or a graph, again, doesn't matter, but expressed using something understandable from a user's point of view, then you get a chance to do better governance, because now you'll see the policy that says managers can view records in their department. We all understand that. And ideally, you would have an owner to that policy. You would have a source requirement to that policy, so you can trace back and you can start doing recertification of your policies or recertification of your graph, because the configuration makes more sense.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I'm considering we have, I mean, we are mostly closing to the end, so we have like 13 minutes, and I want to left another 5 minutes for question and answer at the end. But we have a lot of things that we promised the audience we'll talk about, and I want to talk about. So I'll try. Maybe we can try go quick. Maybe the audience are happy with what we are delivering. We don't know now. We'll know yet by the comments on YouTube and stuff. But I think TR both has like kind of learning curve in implementing, in managing, and is it worth it?
Is it worth it?
Yes.
For whom? Yeah, of course
yeah.
it's worth it. But it's for for the companies, like is it worth it to externalize authorization? Because that's what we're talking about, as opposed to building it in-house in your own app. Yeah, it's absolutely worth it. You have visibility, all the stuff we've been talking about. You've standardized way of doing things. You don't reinvent the wheel every time. Of course, it's worth it. Is it worth it for us? Well, hopefully it is, because we're selling
Security,
platforms to do that.
yeah.
I'll
Security feature. Yeah. Go
sorry,
ahead,
briefly,
David.
Gabriel. I'll add to Alex's point. Is it worth it? The answer is yes, always, but it depends for whom. Like for the business, for the developer, for the audit team, because they have like historically, if you go back 15 years, at least Axiomatics and the competing landscape at the time, we were very much about compliance and security, and you got to make sure you do the right thing and avoid the fines, right? I think there is a shift today, and it's more about enabling new use cases. Awesome, because your business is going to go faster, quicker time to market, but also developer efficiency. And I think, if we look at the new competing landscape, yourselves, Permit.io, but also Asserto and Signal and many other companies that exist, you guys are really focused on the developer experience. Why? Because if you can make the developer experience better, you're going to save developers time. You're going to make their lives happier almost. So it's worth it even for the developer, because now they can focus on what they really care about, which is user features, actual business features, not something getting in the way. And authentication and authorization or stuff that get in the way that you really want to get rid of as quickly as possible. When I say get rid of, I don't mean do a poor job of it. I mean doing a stellar job of it with frameworks that will help you do that job.
Yeah. I think that's a great answer. It's not only about externalizing it, it's about the ROI of this security feature will bring. Al said as a long background as developer, security feature is always something that is easy to justify from the CISO perspective and the most hardest to justify from developer perspective. So there's a good point in giving a good developer experience in it. And a question to you, David, I know that we really plan to talk about, but I know that you are planning starting a hype around Alpha.2. So first, I'll be happy to get a short brief about what is Alpha, what is XACML, and how it's actually different. That's a question that many people ask. And if you have anything, to share with us about the future of Alpha, people can, collaborate, contribute.
Yeah, for sure. So XACML, the Extensible Access Control Markup Language, is a language that started in 2001. It was very much a sibling to SAML at the time. 2001 is the age of SOA, service-oriented architecture, and everything XML. Hi, Eve, if you're listening. I'm a huge fan of XML myself. And XACML, to be honest, the model is good. The language from an abstract standpoint is good. It pretty much solves any authorization use case you want to solve. But the syntax being XML based, it's we've moved past that XML stage. And even in 2001, you wouldn't have wanted to write a XACML policy by hand. Today, even less, right? So Alpha came along in 2012, 2013, if I remember correctly. So 10 years after XACML, 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very much about saying, hey, you want to do XACML? Great. You hate the syntax? You're human. Great. How about we give you this language called Alpha that is easy to write? It's Java-like or C#-like, and you could write your policies very quickly in that language. In that sense, it puts Alpha in the same bucket as Rego or other authorization languages like Cerbos have one, Signal have one, I'm forgetting one, but anyway, there's a bunch of them, right? And they all have their pros and cons. If you compare, say, Alpha with Rego, Rego is not constrained. You can do everything and anything under the sun. Alpha is constrained to authorization. Now, that was 10 years ago. Today, I want to move further with Alpha. There's a group of 6 or 7 different companies that got together, yourselves included, Gabriel, that we just want to make Alpha that much better, because Alpha still has some of the baggage from XACML, and there's no real reason for that baggage. So we should just work on it and make it even easier for developers to write the language. My goal right now, very quickly, Alex, is to either go to IETF or maybe go to OpenID, find a home for the upgraded version of the policy language. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, go ahead, Alex.
No, I just had a quick question. Like, do we need another policy language?
It's the
Like, we
same
already have
one
a
though.
bunch.
I'm sorry, you should, Alex, that question is for the people who came up with Rigo and the people who came up with Cedar and Oso and so on and so forth, or
Yeah,
Polar.
Alpha
Not
was
for
there
Alpha.
that's
before.
fair. That's
Alpha
fair.
was the
That's fair.
alpha.
It's
But
same
I
question
will
though.
say this. I will say this. There is, maybe 3, 4, 5 policy languages out there today. There's, I'd say 3 main ones that are standard like. And maybe it doesn't really matter anymore what the language is like, because your PDP might speak Rigo, might speak Cedar, might speak Alpha, as long as you have a management pane that is capable of managing and governing your policies in one language and then translating to those different languages. Okay, so be it. Why not?
I think that's a good point to bring back the developer experience thing, because permit is based on Rigo, Cedar. We are going also to add Alpha. We are based on graphs like OpenFGA. You can choose your own, although most of the customers or users choose OPA because that's the default, but potentially permit is open and you just send your queries. I'll say that we started with SDK, so most of the permit configuration is just using SDK to configure stuff that translated to either Rigo, Cedar, whatever. But what we saw interesting is for some levels of configuration in permit, you can use Terraform. So we wrote a Terraform provider that actually create the control plane resources in permit, right? So this kind
Oh, we lost Gabriel.
can't do nothing that related to the data. You can't import data with Terraform. All what you can have is create your control plane experience. And I think that's a place where more policy languages could shine, because developers today are kind of language agnostic, right? And they are more platform developers. So I'm not a JavaScript developer. I'm a Node.js developer. I'm a React developer. I'm not a Go language developer. I'm a backend performance developer that use Go language because that's a great language for that. And that will be good if we'll not think another policy language, but we'll think what is the experience that could be better with a new policy language and aim to solve this experience. And with that I'll say that, as David mentioned, we are actually, he is now initiate again everything related to Alpha and the IETF. So if you are a developer or IT architect who want to be on a paper or always dream about developing a language or a standard, that's a great chance to join.
So
And
I
if you
just want to
want to
say
learn
something
more,
here, because all of this is policy as code. But I got to say something. We've built something that is no code. So it's the exact opposite of what you guys are talking about. But it goes along the way of what you're saying, Gabriel, because we are proposing, I mean, we talk about permit. It's you just draw things and we generate everything, including the control plane. Everything's automated and it's all nice and fuzzy. But no code, actually, there's quite a few no-code platforms out there, and it's a trend in development. It makes development much faster. You can literally develop your solution in minutes, like literally in minutes. I can show that, as opposed to hours or weeks or days. So there's definitely a benefit there. I just want to mention that policy as code is not the only option. You can also have no code.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, no code is a question also of experience, right? Many developers really want to have things as code to be part of the software development lifecycle, right? So from my perspective, one of the issues, or not, one of the challenges for developers to do graph-based authorization is managing states. Usually software manages its states by delivery of code. And then you have databases, and they have some form of managing states in databases. But when you are now integrating or incorporating a permissions states that is not a native part of your persistent layer states or code delivery state, that can create some form of complexity in integrating with the software development lifecycle. And the more the market being matured with understanding permissions, the more requirement we see from developers. They say, hey, the most important thing for me is to have a seamless integration to the software development lifecycle. I do not need now a new product or a new technology that challenge the way that I'm delivering software, that break my velocity in delivering software.
Absolutely.
Now, Graph
just
solve
tooling,
it very
though.
well. Yeah,
that is just tooling.
Exactly.
So if you have the right tools, you could probably, I mean, we do. You can export things and check in source control and have your state. So it's just a matter of tooling at that point.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. I think that this is why we need to look on a new policy language, not from a perspective of a new programming language, but a new tool that can create better experience. So we are now 2 minutes to the end. I'll say again to the audience, if you have any question, or I can have another 5 minutes, I hope you too, but if you have any more question, you can drop them in the Zoom chat, you can drop them in the YouTube comments or LinkedIn comment, whatever we are streamlining. I already see one question here. So Tim is asking, where do access control end and the application logic begin? I think we can have a whole live stream only on this one. That's a great idea. Thank you very much, Kid. Tim, he also bring an example. A manager can create discounts, access control, that yields half-price burgers on Tuesday if you order to the mobile app, application logic. You'll have 1 minute to answer that. And it's challenging, but I'll let you try.
My rule of thumb for this is, generally speaking, there's a fuzzy spectrum, right, of authorization policy all the way to business logic. Totally agreed. That's why business rules engines exist as well, by the way. Authorization policies, two things. One, they're side effect free. So the act of asking, can I do this? Yes, no, will never change the state of how many burgers you have to sell in the system. Number one. Number two, if you care about reporting, then it's an authorization policy. And what I mean by that is, if the U.S. government says you cannot sell so many, more than 100 discounted burgers because of, I don't know, FDA, whatever, then that's an authorization policy because you have to report on it. If it isn't, if it's just a business rule and you just want to attract more customers and the marketing team or the customer acquisition team does not necessarily care about strict reporting, not from a security perspective anyway, then it's an application rule.
That's a good answer, a good distinction. Thanks for that, David. Alex, do you want to add to that anything?
Yeah, no, not really. I mean, yeah, no,
yeah, that's great. So
that's a good answer.
You're helping me in wrap up in time. I'll give myself a medal.
Yeah,
and
just don't wanna...
I'm happy that we indeed have 2 winners in this showdown. ABAC and ReBAC, never mind. Just do fine-grained access control. Make sure that you give a good experience for both developers and users and get a better security. Thanks, Alex and David, for joining me.
Thanks for having us, Gabriel. Good stuff. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Tuesday. Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Bye.
Happy Tuesday. Bye.